I want to know when you started expressing yourself in nightlife in California, because I just find it so interesting that it was a time like you can't even fathom a time before Drag Race. And we've had Drag Race since 2009, whereas you were in
Drag Race has been around since 2009? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not paying attention, I guess. That's a long time.
14, 15 years. So then before then, there was a whole other scene that was completely different than what it is now. What was that like growing up in a totally different scene?
Well, I think immediately before Drag Race, there was a drag scene here. RuPaul was a part of it because Drag Race hadn't existed yet. So Ru, I believe, was going through a time in his life where he was just sort of figuring things out. He had just, like left the concept of being supermodel of the world. And then, so he had these few years where he was figuring things out. And that's when I met RuPaul at Peanuts, 7969 nightclub. So drag was still subversive, and it was a scene that was like, there weren't as many drag shows. The drag brunch did not even exist. So drag queens were still kind of like, if you saw them at a club, they were either just there on their own, perhaps performing, or maybe even go-go dancing as just the kind of like splash of color, and drag queens were not the focus. Drag queens were not the attention. But even before that, I grew up here in Southern California where we sort of mimicked a lot of the things that were happening in New York City in the early 90s. We had our own club kid scene. We had clubs that existed that are no longer, that have been torn down. But it was definitely a scene, and it looked very much like what it was happening in like Party Monster. But my group that I hung around with were like the Brown Children. So we were like east of Highland.
Okay.
So all the clubs and things that we did were east of Highland. Anything beyond that, west, was like for the white girls. So I hung out with all the cholas, all the queer cholos, black children. Like we were all brown people. And when you saw a white girl or a white person in the crowd, they were the anomaly. So, my history with drag in Los Angeles is really quite extensive. It should be a book one day, and perhaps if my ADHD just calms down one day or I medicate myself for it, I'll write a book.
I think you should.
I think I should.
That's just such a pivotal time, and it's so different. Many different stories.
It was. And I don't think people really talk about it enough. I think people always focus a lot of the stuff that, the earlier parts of queerness as being a New York City and an East Coast thing, when there was a lot of stuff going on here in the West Coast, and I was lucky enough to be born in a time where I could experience some of it.
And your original drag name wasn't Raja, right?
No, not really. I experimented with a few. Sister Dominion, I think, was one. Crayola was one that I really kind of stuck to for a month. We were club kids, so we wanted clever names that was like colorful and funny, and so Crayola was one. That one didn't last very long. But then Raja came at the time when Aladdin, the film, came out.
Okay.
And a friend of mine worked at Disneyland, and she was telling me about Aladdin, and she said that there was a tiger in the film that was named Raja, and if she ever had a daughter, she would name her daughter Raja. And so that's kind of, and we were driving in a car in my town in La Puente, and we were just talking. I was in the passenger seat, and she was telling me about this, and I'm like, oh my God, that's my name, Raja, because in Indonesian, Raja means king. And I love that kind of play on gender, not a queen, but actually a king.
So you stole her baby name.
Yeah. I wonder if I haven't seen her in many years. It's been like 30 years. So she probably has a baby named Raja, and I don't even know.
Hey.
So I don't know.
Well, there is a picture that you put up a lot on your Instagram, and I need the story behind it. It's you, RuPaul, and Tammie Brown.
Tammie Brown. This is what I'm talking about. RuPaul used to hang out in LA, in West Hollywood specifically, and he would come to Club 7969, which was the drag trans bar.
Okay.
On Mondays in particular, it focused on drag, and on Fridays, it focused more on the trans performers, and I performed on both nights. So that was a picture taken at 7969, which is now, what is it called now?
It's not Laurel Hardware, is it?
Across from Laurel Hardware. It's a building. I think it's, no, there is. Violet Chachki was like, got in trouble because she was like blaming them for being homophobic.
Was that Delilah's?
Delilah's. It is now called Delilah's, but back in the day, it was a very fun, exciting, seedy drag bar, and it was a venue. So like Mario Diaz had hot dog there for the first time. So and even earlier in the 90s, there was a club called Club Fuck there, which was which featured performance artists like Ron Athey, and it was a very important space. And even previous to that, in the 60s and 70s, it was called like the Pussycat Club because it was a strip club with girls. So now it's called Delilah's, but back in the day, that was the spot. And Rue used to come constantly, and she would come and support us, and she would sit at the DJ booth. And there was the one moment where she decided to perform the song, her brand new song at the time, Looking Good, Feeling Gorgeous. So she was premiering and performing this new track that she had, and that's the photo of it. And Tammie Brown happened to be there, and that's the three of us together in the back.
It's the most chaotic photo.
I think that's the night. But Rue is there all the time.
That's pretty awesome. So you had experience with Rue before the show.
Yes, only as, Rue being a supporter of our shows.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't necessarily really close friends, but we were acquaintances, and Rue, even when there was, after that moment, she moved back to New York to do a radio show, I believe, with Michelle Visage. Mm-hmm. She did a radio show in New York City, and she emptied out her closet and left trash bags of it for certain performers that she knew would fit into it, and I was one of them. It was myself, Jasmine, who's a huge inspiration to all of us here in SoCal, Kiwi, who now passed away, and others. But we each got our own trash bag of Rue's like old Lycra David Dalrymple.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. I still have some. I have some things that belong to RuPaul, including the dress that she wore in GQ magazine in the 90s, her robe that she wore in the Supermodel video. I have those things, and they are very, very, very precious to me.
Have you ever done like a photo shoot or anything with them?
No. Those are
they're relics.
They are relics. They're very important pieces. They are my roomie-downs, I call them. And a few of us here in Southern California, Queens, do own some roomie-downs.
See, and that's another chapter for the book.
Another chapter for the book.
It really is iconic, just hearing the history of everything.
Well, I mean, that photo of me being with RuPaul pre-Drag Race is pretty controversial to some, to fans who don't even understand what was happening at that time. But Rue was a friend, an acquaintance, somebody who really loved us and trusted us and supported us. And, I was probably chosen to be,
Mm-hmm.
I was chosen to be on the show. And only because I think that at that time in season 3, they really wanted to kind of change things up and add something that was different. And I provided that, perhaps.